Joining us now in studio is Mark Schulman, author of Tel Aviv Diary and columnist at Newsweek, and i24 News correspondent Robert Swift. A quick note before we begin. Any minute, we are waiting for the NATO Secretary General to speak. So if that happens, we will bring it to you live and have to interrupt. So just please be advised. All right. So who wants to start? Clearly, we first Trump's use of words, and to all of a sudden say, all right, that's it, as he's been trying to delay that decision. What's different this time?
I think he reached a certain point and just couldn't take it anymore, frankly. The Iranians may have overstepped the line just a little bit. They're so convinced.
A horseshoe away.
They're so convinced they won that they have to throw it in the face of Trump, to a lesser extent in our face, and in the whole world. They won, they won, they won. But Trump has been saying, I won, I won, I won. And it reaches a point where it's not believable anymore to keep this going on. In terms of the Straits, the basic deal was go all the way back to the first ceasefire.
Yeah.
The first ceasefire was they open the Straits and we have a ceasefire, and then we work about everything else. They violated from day one. From day one, he should have gone back and fighting, frankly. Not that I'm in favor of fighting. Mind you, I don't think we can achieve anything.
Yeah, exactly.
But leave that part aside.
We know you're not his biggest fan, anyway.
No, not his biggest fan, generally speaking. But leave that part, put that in the side. And I'm not sure what we can do, but the fact of the matter is they violated all the terms of the agreement from the very, very beginning. And I think Trump realized that he can't keep on letting them have oil, violating the agreement, and doing nothing. Now, what can he do? That's really the problem. The reason there was a ceasefire to begin with was the conclusion that there isn't much more we can do. And if Trump is willing to have a war of attrition for 6 months, 9 months, it might actually work in the end, but not in a week, not in 2 weeks, not in any short period of time. Has he written off the midterms? Maybe. That's
right. I mean, that's the thing. Let's be real here. I mean, this was definitely, starting to listen to, right-wing Republican leaders now turning on Israel. I think where there's smoke, there's fire. I think this was, something people are wondering. So what's your side? Yeah.
A lot of people have been thinking that the midterms will be the point where things could or couldn't change. Essentially, that if Trump is going to conduct a large-scale escalation, larger than what we've seen today, then there was, this is all speculation, but there's a fair bit of speculation that would not take place until the midterms. What we're seeing today, I don't think really changes that assessment.
Other than there's a lot of time between now and then when we're dealing with war.
Absolutely, there is. But at the minute, it does seem that there's just sort of aggressive negotiation where where both sides are essentially trying to negotiate with the other, and when they don't get their way, they start using military force. Well, and that seems to be a continuation of what
yeah, except there hasn't been any real negotiation. That's part of the problem. In other words, they haven't touched they haven't touched the nuclear deal.
No, but they continue to say, we're going to talk.
Yeah, but the Straits of Hormuz, every single time the Iranians come out and say, we will never give up the Straits of Hormuz. It's ours forever. And, of course, that's something that Trump can't allow to have happen. So I don't know. Look, I didn't think anything was going to happen. And period. I thought we were done, quite frankly. My daughter's getting married in October.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh.
People coming
so between a wedding, elections, and midterms, this is, you're not going on a vacation. No, you're not going on the honeymoon with her.
I didn't think this was going to happen. On the other hand, look, we're dealing with Trump, who we can never, ever predict what he's going to do. Anyone who thinks he can predict what Trump is going to do,
it's all exactly.
Right.
He doesn't know what he's going to do from 1 minute to the next.
And look, even this morning, he contradicted himself. He made all those statements and said, but the negotiations can continue. And so you can't really tell what he's saying, when he's going to say it. And he's dealing with the Iranians, who are crazy, to be quite honest, in terms of extremists. Again, crazy is a question of what you mean by that, but they're extreme.
Allegedly.
They're clearly extreme. They clearly think they won. From their own perspective, they won the war, and they think they can keep on pushing it. Now, can they really? I don't think us around the table, I'm hoping that our intelligence services know exactly what state Iran is in right now. What's the economic state? Can they keep on pushing this? Will it collapse on itself? We do not know.
Well, exactly. Let's talk about from Israel's perspective. I mean, what does this mean? I mean, the prime minister, the IDF's hands have been somewhat tied as Trump is pretty much saying, get it together. So what does this mean? If Trump's losing faith, could we be facing potential repeats of a few months ago here in Israel?
In terms of from the Israeli perspective, let's look at it from the Israeli public, first of all. In terms of, is Israel about to have sirens going off again? I suspect that that would not be the case unless there's an escalation elsewhere. I don't see. It seems less likely to me that the Iranians would take that step further forward. The Iranians usually prefer to try and escalate in a controlled manner rather than conduct a wild escalatory step. Where it may have an impact is how this might tie into Lebanon and events that are taking place there.
Yeah.
The IDF have had their freedom of operation restrained by the U.S. administration, and there is some position there that the Israelis may see that they have a bit more freedom of action if relations between the United States and Iran are deteriorating. At the same time, Israel's position is that the conflict in Lebanon and the conflict with Iran should be kept separate, that they are not related. Iran and Hezbollah argue that they are related. So from Israel's perspective, maybe it doesn't make sense to try and to escalate in Lebanon just because things are deteriorating.
Well, yeah, exactly.
We have another unknown, of course, and that's Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Right.
We have no idea what he wants. I mean, look, he wanted the elimination of the Iranian regime like we all did. He took the risk that it might happen. It's always possible at any given moment. And again, depending on what the game they...
So then what's the in-between? If the MOU isn't going to happen and no one wants to escalate, where does that leave us? No man's land.
Just continuing where we are, just this on-off, semi-frozen likely to be what we'll continue going through.
That's the most likely outcome. But again, we don't know what's going on with the Iranian nuclear program in the meantime. What are they doing secretly? What are they doing that we do know about? We don't know how much we know. Certainly people in this room don't know. Some people hopefully...
A lot of people claim to know, but,
yeah,
no one knows. Yeah.
Well, there's some people I hope know in a few places. But leave that part aside. We just don't know what they're going to do. And look, something else, people have to understand that this country needs to heal. Mm-hmm. Regardless of whether it was successful or a failure of this operation, this country is very, very tired.
Yes.
And
a lot of trauma and
every
mental
sort of
health
way,
and
children.
People are not paying attention to that part, especially abroad. They could criticize Israel, criticize the war or not, but there's a whole forgotten millions of people living here that have
gone through a broken country, but an injured country.
It's clear that the public is exhausted.
Right.
Just talking to people on the street, this sort of thing comes up time and time again, that the public, even the Israeli public, are not accustomed to this level of prolonged conflict for this long at the intensity which it's been fought at. That has an impact on government budgets, but it also just has an impact on people's well-being and their ability to continue doing it.
A friend of mine owns a coffee shop, and during the last time, I think Netanyahu gave a speech and talked about the resilience of the Israeli people. And she turned to me and said, did anyone ask me if I have resilience? I mean, there's a limit. People haven't gotten
resilience in the spirit. Fine. Maybe. We were at the beach the other day or whatever, walking, but still, at the end of the day, it's businesses that are closing. People with families and jobs that keep getting called into the reserves, and it's
people who decide
it's let everything just
they can relocate for a few years overseas. It doesn't make a difference. They're digital nomads. All these things, and we don't even know the full impact. And it'll take a few
and we
years.
have an election coming up, too.
And it's also worth bearing in mind that this exhaustion is not evenly distributed across the country. In the north, the level of exhaustion there is much, much higher than...
And uncertainty.
Absolutely. There's entire villages which have still not gone back up to their pre-conflict populations because people left and then they were told they can come back, and they did. And then the violence kicked off again. And a lot of people they just don't want to continue with it. And that obviously feeds into the national...
Well, and also we're in summer. I mean, this is also, a time, it's the Hofesh HaGadol, where you're supposed to breathe a little bit. And the North is still stuck with nowhere to go. And I think it's...
no tourism. I mean, there's no tourism in this country, generally speaking.
Forget about the economy
that goes without saying, Look, we don't need another war. It's very clear. We've never fought a war this long. Our national plan was always short wars for good reason. I want to bring back Ben Gurion, please, and remind everybody what his thoughts were on these things.
Yes, which were, remind everybody.
Everybody was that we'd have short wars, they would be decisive, and we'd make sure we maintain one significant ally abroad. And in this day, we have a long, long war. That long war is putting us in a situation where we might possibly lose our most important ally. These are emergency times, frankly.
Yeah.
And very few people are talking about that. And everything he said was correct, but we ignored it.
So we're about to, by the way, just to remind everybody, we're about to hear from the Secretary General of NATO. So this should be happening any moment. And yes.
I think it's worth comparing the last two wars with Iran, the 12-day war last summer and the more prolonged war earlier this year, just in terms of the impact they had on the Israeli public. Because in terms of physical damage, Israel was received... there was more visible damage done to Israel during the 12-day war. There's still buildings in Tel Aviv that are scarred from it. Whereas with the war that took place earlier this year with Iran, of course, ballistic missiles continued to be fired at Israel. But that wasn't the real damage that took place. It was more the length of the conflict, the number of times that families had to get up from their beds in the middle of the night and run to the shelters.
It was,
and that's
that was exhausting.
Right, and the
kids
length
and up
of
and
it.
down, and it's.
And when it comes to trauma, I think is generally understood that just as the severity of the trauma is significant, the impact on the individual, but also
and we don't have the post part yet. That's the other thing. There's no post yet to even begin dealing with it.
We have no idea about kids. Both there was a study recently that 3/4 of the children of people who are doing long reserve duty all have post-trauma just from that.
Yeah.
And I have no idea. I think of what the studies are going to come out. I'm not a sociologist, but I can't imagine what it's going to show after this period of time in history for us.
Well, let's hope a year from now we're not having this same conversation. Let's also, because let's talk a little bit about the NATO summit. We're about to, have more from that. But President Trump being there had important meetings with Erdogan, but then on one hand saying, okay, we may sell F-35s to Turkey. So, I mean, what could have possibly been if you were a fly on the wall in that room?
With Erdogan, look, he loves Erdogan for whatever reason we don't know. The same reason he loves Putin for whatever reason we don't really know why he loves Putin. These are things in history that I doubt I'll be alive when the archives finally open and we find out what the relationship between some of these people were. So we don't know. Clearly, he sees him as a strong man, as someone who supports him. That's what's most important. Supporting him is the single most important thing. And he can take credit, and that's what he likes doing. I don't think the meeting with Zelensky didn't take place yet, did it? I don't think it did.
It's going to be happening
right. That's probably the most important thing, frankly, in terms of the NATO summit more than anything else. And we're all crazy about the F-35s. If the Turks get the F-35s, it's going to be 5 years from now, 8 years from now. I leave it to the IDF and the IAF, the Israeli Air Force, by then to have solutions.
Yeah.
And they're not going to have the same avionics as our planes do, because our planes have our own avionics. I'm not as worried and to go completely nuts.
But let's talk. He's also meeting with al-Shara today,
right?
As well. So,
well, that as far as I'm concerned is the most.
He hasn't done anything about the Hezbollah issue, but the president hosting him at the White House seems to have a lot lot of respect for him and all of that. But what does that leave us and still the ongoing situation?
Our life of me, I don't understand our policy. For the life of me, I do not understand why it's more important to hold on to another X square miles of Syria as opposed to making a deal with this man. I do not understand. It makes no sense. We don't have the troops. We're short of the troops. Taking that area requires additional troops to occupy it and to be there. And on top of everything else, here was a mixed opportunity. I accept the views of some people in the intelligence community who say once a jihadist, always a jihadist. That might be true. But look at the size.
People can change.
People can change. Look at the size of the risk we took trying to eliminate the leadership of Iran, and it failed. Don't you think we could take a much smaller risk and try to make some sort of deal with somebody who claims to have changed and the whole world thinks he changed? Maybe he hasn't. But I'm not suggesting we invite Syrian troops into Tel Aviv. But to make some sort of deal with him, take the risk.
It goes beyond that. I think it's, you talked about the missed opportunity. It's a huge missed diplomatic opportunity. You think about it, that the Syrian public have been fed stories about the Israelis for so long. And at the end of the day, it was the Israeli government's actions that caused the fall of Assad by weakening Hezbollah that gave Shara the opportunity to overthrow the government. That could have been a scenario which completely reset the relationship between Israel and Syria. Mm-hmm. And in many ways, Syrians I've spoken to have said that Israel kind of played up to the stereotype that they had been led to believe. If you look at the situation now, Israeli troops inside Syria control more territory there on the ground than they do inside Gaza. That's how much. It's not. We're not talking about a small patch of ground. I mean, Gaza is very small. That's true, but still, it's a significant bit of territory inside Syria. That I'm inclined to agree with you. It doesn't necessarily provide that much additional military security for them, and it's at the expense of that diplomatic détente that could have taken place and didn't.
Right.
I just finished a book that ends with the put a little addition on the last Iranian period. But if I was going to write that book in another couple of years or even a couple of months, the tragedy of this whole period of time will be that we had no diplomacy, that our response always was military. The only thing we knew was a military response. Mm-hmm. We didn't know anything about diplomacy anywhere. And that's the tragedy of this period of time. Now, may not have succeeded diplomacy, I don't know. But we've had no diplomatic outreach in any front at any time. The biggest thing is what's going on in Lebanon, and that was forced on us by the Americans. So it's a tragedy because we don't know what could have been, and we're stuck where we are because we have no diplomacy.
So just to kind of bring this home again with where we are, reminding everyone that the MOU is on the brink of imploding completely, and only time will tell, as we also hear from President Trump and what Iran is going to continue to react to. But again, let's just bring this back to Israel and, Iran blaming Israel about Lebanon, southern Lebanon, and Hezbollah. So how is this whole thing going to be affected as we continue swimming in all directions with no final destination at this point?
I think you just said it. We're just swimming in all directions with no final destination. It's certainly going to wait until there's a new government here.
Yeah.
Because no one's going to take any action whatsoever. Will a new government be able to take action? I don't know. I really don't.
And will we still be in this situation 6 months or however many months until the election?
My money would be yes.
Yes, I can't see what's going to happen to change that. I can't see, look, the only deal that exists with Lebanon, a full peace deal, which I don't think can happen, but we'll leave that part aside. The only scenario requires us to remove most of our troops from where they are right now. Netanyahu can't do it politically before the election.
Right.
So that's not an option. He can move, a few troops here and there, claim whatever, but he can't come close to bringing them back to the lines that we had before the latest incursion in Lebanon, where we had five bases or 7 bases, five bases, and which was great. I mean, to the life of me, I will never understand, again, when we write history, why it was necessary to go back into Lebanon this time. We were free to do whatever we wanted. We had our bases there. They weren't on the border. We made our situation worse. But.
So if you're Prime Minister Netanyahu, and again, we do have a big election coming up, and I think the future is at stake for a lot of millions of people living here. But if you're in the Prime Minister's state of mind, is it more in his interest for this not to be resolved by the time of the election, or is the other, like, which will fare? Look, I don't want to plan in the future, but I'm just thinking in his eyes, what's better for him.
Netanyahu is a base politician more than anything else. He goes to his base more than anything. He's already afraid of losing his base for various reasons. Pulling out from Lebanon after, I don't know how many casualties we had during this last incursion. It's not a small number.
Right.
Pulling out and going back to where we are would be admitting defeat. He can't do that. So I think he's best off by, look, what are the Likud people saying right now? Look, we're holding 40, 50, 60% of Gaza. Oh, so Hamas isn't its son, but we're holding all this land. The same thing is talking about Syria. Look at all the amount of Syria we're holding. Look at all the things we're holding. Look what we're holding in Lebanon, as if that brings about peace. And that's his line. That's his only line at this point. The only thing he can say is, look at all the territory I've gained for Israel. And so I don't see him wanting to reach any sort of agreement before the election.
What are your thoughts?
He needs to project strength. Like, not all Israelis, but a sizable number of Israelis still hold Netanyahu accountable for what happened on October 7th.
Yes.
It was his watch. He'd been prime minister for most of 20 years. So that is hanging over him. And that is why this entire game of when will the election happen has been going on for the last 2.5 years. And so he needs to project strength, like it or not, in Israel, and it's always been the case during the conflict with the Palestinians, land is seen as strength. Land is seen as what the conflict is about. And so one way to project strength to his base is to say, look how much more territory I got. I've made Israel greater than it was previously. Is that going to be sufficient to eclipse the stain that some people believe hangs over him for October the 7th? we'll find that out.
Has he lost enough support within his base? Is the question when it comes down to
that's
it.
why he's targeting soft
what Tel Avivians and most people in Central Israel.
Look, it's clearly the current coalition has 64 or 68, depending on how you count it. All polls right now, none of them show him more than 52. So he's lost support. Will he have enough support to block another government from forming? That's really the big question at this point, and we don't know.
Something on this issue that I've found very fascinating, and I don't have an answer to, is if you buy into the argument that often Netanyahu has leaned towards more aggressive, more security-minded policies, i.e. attacking Iran and etc., because he believes that it will be good with his base, he's never really had a good sustained bump in the polls, both immediately after the 12-day war, despite the fact that Israel was generally perceived by Israelis to have succeeded during the 12-day war. There wasn't an obvious sustained bump for him in the polls. Same thing has been true after the second conflict with Iran. Despite taking these policy decisions, it doesn't seem to have translated.
We're going to take a short break. We'll be back with more. Don't go anywhere. And thanks for watching i24. Now we're back with Mark and Robert Swift here. We just heard a bit of this conversation. So yes, we have just gotten this declaration of $50 billion in procurements and also Ukraine. So who wants to take the floor first?
Look, the Ukrainian war has changed dramatically in the last year. Ukraine's technology is better than the Russian technology at this point. It's resulted in the fact they're able to build thousands and thousands of drones quickly, as well as their own missiles. They're engaging in substantial hurt or damaging the Russians in ways they were not expecting. 60% of the Russian refining capability has been removed. From what I understand, today alone, they attacked 23 tankers in the secret Russian, or whatever they call that, Phantom Fleet. Today alone, they attacked that many. They're putting real pressure on Moscow. For the first time, the Russians are feeling the war at home. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, they've cut off Crimea almost completely, the area that the Russians had captured in 2014 from the Ukrainians. So on the battlefield, if for a period of 2 years it was looking like the Russians were slowly but surely winning, now it looks like the Ukrainians are beginning to win. And they're certainly engaging in or delivering a great deal of pain to the Russians. And will this be enough to get Putin to give up his dream of capturing Kiev? I don't know. The man is obsessed with it, and I really don't know. I think,
but he also, has a relationship with President Trump. I mean, maybe President Trump will start to pressure Putin again, like
we have never seen Trump pressure Putin. We've seen him the other way.
Why? He pressures everybody but Putin.
We don't understand that relationship. I'll leave it at that. We really do not understand that.
And he always talks about Witkoff, how much Witkoff and Putin get along.
Well, it's also worth bearing in mind that Trump loves a winner. It's widely known, and like you just said, Mark. The Ukrainians have slightly flipped the script in the last 4 months. I wouldn't say that they're winning, but they're certainly not losing at the pace they were a year ago.
Well, yeah, for sure. They're not the victims.
But let's keep in mind the fact that the Ukrainians keep on hitting industrial targets in Russia. The Russians keep on attacking civilian targets in Kiev and other places. Russia is the aggressor. Russia is the war crime committer here. And yet, it's not equivalent. And NATO doesn't think it's equivalent. Most of the world doesn't think it's equivalent. Sometimes President Trump seems to think it's equivalent.
So what else? Let's talk about the procurements. I mean, what does that entail?
Well, the thing that the Ukrainians are desperately seeking at the minute is interceptor missiles. So there was an attack on Kyiv 2 nights ago, which killed more than 20 people in the capital and the surrounding areas. And one of the chief reasons that the damage was so significant is that the Russians fired a mix of cruise ballistic missiles as well as drones. But of the ballistic missiles that were fired, the Iranians didn't intercept a single one of them. I think it was about 23 that were launched, and the Ukrainians were low on Patriot interceptor missiles. So these are the sorts of weapons, specific weapon systems that they require. I was listening to a Ukrainian member of parliament speak about this just in the last day or two. And she was saying that the thing that they want more than anything is permission from the American government to start manufacturing Patriots inside Ukraine. They're saying there's a bottleneck in the production worldwide of these sorts of highly advanced weapon systems. The Ukrainians have got pretty good at manufacturing weapons and of learning.
Well, they have these sophisticated drones that I just did a piece on, without the RF and able to get past. Let's speak about also the $50 billion in procurements that NATO declared aside from Ukraine. The U.S. has put the majority of the money into this.
No, the $50 billion is euros. That's money.
Right.
It's coming
dollars, but
it's coming from the Europeans, not from the Americans.
That's what I mean. But the Europeans have put money in.
No, it's all $50 billion. It's all the European money. They want to make themselves independent to some extent of the United States. They don't want to be dependent on the United States. Until now, they've been dependent on certain systems on the United States. The Europeans do not have heavy lift capability. They rely on the United States for heavy lift capability. There's one Airbus sort of transport plane, but it hasn't been very successful. They need to develop their independent heavy lift capability. They need to develop their own anti-missile technology. Germany bought it from us. Other than that,
who else has them?
Just the United States, I think, at this point.
But do the countries have any defense?
In general, Europe really is behind the picture when it comes to this sort of defense, because they
didn't
never
expect
and until the last few years, they didn't even think that
it would ever happen. Right?
Israel was one of the few countries really that had the level of air defense.
Because Israel knows,
right?
It's pretty clear that wiping Israel off the map is a priority for me.
They have a fighter jet. They have a couple of fighter jets, actually. Both Sweden and France both produce planes. It's not clear how good they are, but they both produce fighter planes, certainly as good as the Russian planes.
What purpose would they serve all of this infrastructure? Like, for what?
No, and listen, let's assume for the sake of argument that after Trump comes J.D. Vance, and after J.D. Vance comes someone else who's very much an isolationist and goes back to the 30s, and the United States doesn't have to support Europe anymore, doesn't have to support NATO anymore. Therefore, NATO needs its own ability to produce weapons. It has its own ability to not be dependent on the United States anymore. As an economy, they're as big as the United States. They have the ability, the industrial might, to produce what they need to produce. The Germans produce tanks, for instance, and good tanks. So they have the ability, if they get together and figure out what they need to make, make a list, so to speak. What are they dependent on the United States? What can they do? Which scientists do they have? What design engineers do they have? What can they buy from us secretly? What can they, or not so secretly as the Germans have, what can they buy from other places? And put together a defense package not dependent on the United States. Look, Trump administration, for better or for worse, you can love him and hate him. But what his actions have said to the world is you can't depend on the United States forever. And so if you can't depend on the United States forever, you need time
to grow up. And,
you need to have alternatives.
You're turning 18. It's time to grow up. I'm kicking you out of the house, kids.
Well, but there is. Everyone has their own specialties. It really doesn't make sense for everyone to produce the same things.
Right.
But
Rob, the problem is that the European Union, if we're talking about European defense, they keep replicating the same thing. The United States military is a unified single entity. So even if the EU's
and coordinated,
even if the GDP is bigger in the European Union, they keep replicating the same things over and over again. That's why only the United States has certain heavy lift capabilities, Spectre gunships, things like these. There's certain systems that only really the US has the money for because it's unified in its purpose. The European Union is anything but defined in its purpose, and that continues to be a problem. But Donald Trump is definitely nudging them in this direction. Not only, even in his first term, he complained about this, but through his actions rather than his words in his second term, he has accelerated the pace that Europeans realize that they need to protect themselves. By his threat to take hold of Greenland, which, that's come up at the summit today.
Oh,
the Europeans are
got to go there too.
Not keen on that as an idea. But also with regards to what's happened with Iran. Most Europeans see the US policy in Iran over the last 6 months as a disaster, and it's impacted them and their economies. Mm-hmm. And they realize we can't be dependent on the US for defense and then tell the US we don't like your foreign policy.
Greenland.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about that in a while.
No, he brought it up again. He brought it up again yesterday. He said the only way to protect Greenland is if we protect it. And that's, he keeps on talking about it again. He has that obsession. And
but just a question, just a thought. I mean, Greenland is so rich with natural resources. Yes, is there a positive outcome, regardless if Trump wants to take it over and not? Is there
positive for who?
Could the energy reserves be used better than currently?
Well, look, it's positive for the United States if it takes it over and got its hands on the mineral reserves, et cetera, et cetera. But it's up to the people of Greenland and Denmark.
And also saying
don't
that,
have the infrastructure to do something about it. So
existing arrangements, agreements between Denmark and the United States already give the United States access to many of those assets anyway. So the U.S. gaining it wouldn't necessarily increase the resources available.
Right. So
to
who
us.
is dealing with the assets that are there now?
Is
there export? Is there, or it's all just sitting there?
No, there's some companies that are investigating it. I mean, it's expensive to mine in Greenland. Remember, it's cold, ice covered, et cetera, et cetera. But the United States can have as many bases as it wants in Greenland. There's no limitations. The agreement it has with the Danish government, it could have 100 bases in Greenland if it wanted. Obviously, it doesn't have the troops and the need for it. This is just an obsession that he has.
And it's worth noting that the European Union has again come out this morning and saying that Greenland, that who controls Greenland is for the Greenlander people and the Danish government to decide.
Look, Trump's problem, there's many, but one of his big problems is the fact that you need a coordinated policy when you do things. You want European support in the Iran war? Well, you got to talk to them, first of all, in advance. You got to drop this Greenland nonsense, and you got to pledge a little more support to...
Over the tariffs. I mean, he also didn't start the presidency trying to...
And you walk away from Ukraine to some extent, which the Europeans care about a great deal. That doesn't put you in a position to say, oh, why aren't you helping me on Iran? But wait a second, you didn't talk to me about Iran first. Talk to me in advance. What's our joint strategy? Let's try a joint diplomatic strategy, put pressure together. And if that doesn't work, we're all in with you. But he doesn't do that. Look, I'll give you another example. One of the biggest disasters of the last war with Iran in terms of the United States is he could not explain to the American people. Even, if I was Trump and we got into the bad situation, in other words, it hadn't worked initially, I would have given a speech and invited the Democrats in and said, listen, this hasn't worked well. It's a bit of a disaster. However, we can't allow the Iranians to gain control of the most important waterway in the world. We must do everything we can. I admit my mistake. Now, please help me, and let's work together to find a plan. You can't do that.
I don't think he's ever used the words, I admit my mistake.
Yes, I know.
Aside admitting making a mistake.
Yes, well, he shares something with a certain leader.
We hopefully will have a meeting between Zelensky and Trump and have more to talk about, if not during this show and in the later shows, because there's a lot of things happening today simultaneously at these meetings. But, any overall takeaways, if we were to, sum up this whole conversation, there's a lot of moving parts. What, I guess, in terms of most importance for those of us sitting here is to see what's going to happen with Iran. But clearly, there's a lot of other things on the agenda that will make a difference as we continue in years ahead.
Absolutely. Look, Ukraine is the biggest thing that's going to make a difference in the years ahead in terms of world history. How that gets resolved, and if that gets resolved in a positive sort of way and ends Putin's ambitions to rebuild the Soviet Union and leave it Russia, that's kind of a major impact. The Iranian situation, we do not know. There's so much we don't know about what's going on in Iran right now. We don't know where that is going. Doesn't look good, but we truly don't know. For Israel, this has not been the best of times. We talk about the disaster of October 7th. The disaster, if the MOU continues, is a disaster for Israel too. And we don't know where that's going. There are so much unknowns at this point that...
So we just have to all hold our breath for the rest of the summer because really there are unknowns. Nobody knows.
Right.
You can ask any question, anybody. What do you think? We're going to have, only Trump knows what he's going to do, but Trump doesn't also decide... He could have two different decisions in one day.
All I know is I tell anyone who wants to leave Israel or come to Israel, or whatever, just book on El Al. Don't book on any other airline.
I'm trying to do that myself, figure out when I'm going to go.
Just book on El Al. That's the only thing I've done for the last year.
Yeah, they've got a lot of extra business from me, more than they should have done in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
I think the most, from my perspective, the most interesting thing from this NATO summit is the power dynamics and the relationship between the Americans and the Europeans. Because obviously, for decades, NATO was America. They absolutely dominated.
Hello. Sorry to interrupt, but we now have something to show you all. We see President Zelensky and President Trump.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be with President